Okay, yeah, so very happy to take questions from the audience here. If you have any, you can scan the QR code and send them into this Excel sheet, which right now is just filled with like lewd things. I don't know who put them in there, but thank you very much.
It's a seed phrase.
It's not a seed phrase. Thank God you can't attach images. All right. Okay. Let's start by maybe like from the beginning of the day. So one of the first things that we talked about today was Lido's new foray right into DeFi and yields and earn. So Marin, given that you're the expert here, how much money should I put in earn ETH?
All of it, but not financial advice.
No, okay. So I think one of the most interesting things to talk about is like the first loss mechanism, right? And it's something that's been done before, but like you said, definitely not at the scale. And I don't think we've ever seen a DAO really dog food one of its products in this way and in this manner. And also, if you look at the amounts, right, we said 5 million total allocation right now, but potentially it might increase. I think 3 million in earn ETH and 2 million in earn USD. But relative to the size of the vaults, that means that USD positions are like way more, like very, very highly protected. Basically, like the vault needs to get nuked for anything bad to happen to somebody. How are you guys thinking about what other kind of like protection mechanisms are built around vaults, and how are we kind of like using Lido security focus both around operations and smart contracts to beef up, vault infrastructure that kind of like already exists?
So no, actually great points. Happy to start with this. There's a bunch of vaults that actually started developing trenching systems. So if you look in examples like Machina, they already have it and support it. But no one is brave enough to put their money where the mouth is. So that's the difference. We are very confident. We know what we're doing as Lido contributors in this. We all contributed to various DeFi protocols, either by actively collaborating with them or over time growing them through STETH, because for me, STETH is DeFi. If we go back, yes, there was a period of half a year, 10,000% APYs, crazy stuff, but then boom, DeFi happens, right? And fundamentally, it started from the STETH, and when STETH got on Aave, when people discovered loops, then we got in Rehypo through Balancer, when idle LP positions got moved. So that's a bit of a historical part, but it's all very kind of risky, right? With this approach, we have the experience, but what we utilize from Lido senior contributors, we took like security practices of the core protocol, and then we moved it to earn. So there's active monitoring, there's collateral monitoring, there's like so many things happening in the background that it's impossible to even explain it all. But what can we tell you? We sometimes get up at 4 a.m., alarms ring, maybe it's false alarm, maybe not, but we are one of the few actually teams out there that take this quite seriously. So I hate naming names, but you will probably recognize them. There was an issue now with Resolve. And again, one of the usual suspects lost money to the users. Why? Because they were asleep at the helm and they didn't react to the market. For example, Lido contributors pulled out of the Resolve 3 weeks before something happened. So we didn't expect it on USR side, but we were monitoring collateral situation. And these mechanisms on top of the infrastructure that exists, we are very, very confident that we can maintain this level and quality of service. We probably won't be able to compete on APYs with everyone because it's either speed and APY or security. We prefer to keep your pants on. If you were on the talk before, you know what I'm speaking about.
That's a weird pickup line, Marin, but okay, all right. Okay, maybe one more earn thing before we move on to another segment and then come back for it if anybody has any questions. Anything that you can tease in terms of things that you might be thinking about adding to earn?
So there are plenty of things that are happening. It's a bear market, obviously. Teams are building. So we might see credit delegation on top, which should secure us huge amounts of rewards and yield uncompliantly, semi-compliant. Don't get stressed. Then there are also credit lines that we are exploring, which would work magic, right? Because people who deposit in size want also to leave quickly. So if we secure credit lines for this type of thing and utilize Lido Trust, because we are good for it, it's in the vault, we can service very fast withdrawals, meanwhile slowly unwinding without hurting the principal.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I look forward to more vaults being on there in the future as well. I don't know. Maybe something like oil futures might be interesting in this time and day. There's one more earn question here. Hold on 1 second. How many folks from the Lido crew are actually earning in EarnETH? And I guess like how many of us are actually using the product? I don't know. Show of hands, maybe. Okay. I don't see anybody from Lido not using EarnETH, so that's probably pretty good. All right, let's talk about CSM a little bit. What share is CSM going to be in a year?
That's a good. Okay, my mic is working.
And also which CSM, I guess, but.
Yes, that's a great question. So, like right now as we speak, current CSM is getting beefier and beefier. We have just surpassed 7%. And this is far from the theoretical possible limit that at least contributors have in mind. So if we talk the end of the year and the situation with the deposits where the stake moving here and there is favorable, and we see a reasonable demand for OXO2 CSM, which I believe we would see because, again, economical conditions all here is like perfect. So my assumption is that the majority of the big operators who are currently in the original CSM would migrate to OXO2 validators. And in total, we would see numbers like 12 to 15% by the end of the year. Again, in my personal opinion, the theoretical limit can be higher. So something like 25% of the protocol might easily be secured by permissionless participants. But let's be realistic here. The stake takes time to move. And if we talk end of the year, I think something between 12 to 15% is very realistic, especially if we ramp up with OXO2 CSM.
Okay, so that would be across both of the modules, basically.
Yes, for sure. And honestly speaking, like even though from the technical perspective, these modules would be different, we would never position them separately. It would be like more of a new way for CSM, so a way for OXO2 credentials, but in CSM. And even though, again, technically these modules would be different, the only difference would be the type of the operators and the bond requirements. Other than that, nothing different than a few node operator types that we already have.
And speaking of node operator types, and I think, Sasha, you promised to talk more about this later. And even though we're getting rid of some of my favorite acronyms in Lido, like the LNOSG, we're introducing new ones like IDVTC. So what is IDVTC? Why should we care? And what does it mean for node operators that are using CSM?
Yeah, sure. So the idea of IDVTC came when we saw a pretty good community response on our previous idea. There was ICS. ICS stands for Identify Community Staker. And then we were thinking that bringing a more like affordable path for node operators to validate permissionlessly within CSM would be a good exercise for us to try. So we recently published a proposal on the research forum that introduces a new node operator type for CSM, which is called IDVTC, Identified DVT Cluster, where the main idea would be that all of the cluster participants must be identified community stakers. And they will be getting capital efficiency like at levels that CSM has never seen before. So it's basically
that's absolutely true.
Yeah, that's basically lowered lowered bond requirements with also like pretty favorable conditions both for stakers and for the Lido protocol, which is also important for it to be good for the Lido protocol in terms of like how scalable it can be at the end of the day. So I think that here we found a pretty good balance within the like economical structure of this type. This type is about to go live at the same time when we release curated module V2, so Q3 this year. And I think that like we already saw a pretty good response from community on that. I mean, different one, but mostly positive. So yeah, we'll see. And this also something that will contribute to the overall CSM and permissionless share within the Lido protocol.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Staying on CSM, especially given that we talked about how we envision CSM share of the protocol increasing. Do we think that CSM uptime requirements, so the performance threshold that we're using, will need to go higher if share grows, basically to reduce the drag downwards on Lido's overall effectiveness in terms of APR?
That's a great question, and I think we already had a few discussions in Discord regarding that, and I'm happy that someone asked it. So let me comment on that. The idea with the performance threshold is a bit more complicated than it might seem from a get-go. So if you have if you look at the current performance requirements in CSM, they look as follows. So your validators should not perform below network average minus 3% absolute, which means that you should be at average or might be slightly below. However, it doesn't mean that all or the majority of the validators are actually at this threshold. The thing with running validators is that it's very hard to artificially maintain like specific performance. You always try to do your best, because otherwise even a small hiccup might end up in you dropping significantly below. So this threshold is chosen not because of an acceptable long-term performance of the validators, but rather based on the reality of home staking, where you might go offline for something like 24 hours within a month. So it doesn't mean that each and every validator in CSM does that every month. It doesn't mean that we have offline validators, like for every validator once in a month for 24 hours. No, we are allowing for that. But in overall, if you look at the performance of CSM, actually CSM on average outperforms a few, like for sure it's the best performing permissionless staking protocol, no questions asked. But it also outperforms a few centralized operators. I would not name them exactly, but you can easily check it on Rated or on Beacon Chain. So I do not see any particular need to tighten this threshold, because I don't believe that it would significantly improve performance. What it would do, it would reduce the leeway for home stakers and will make it slightly harder for them to be in CSM. And we are currently at the stage of Ethereum and at the stage of Lido where what matters is decentralization. So we are at a very good network level performance. Again, if you look at the graphs, network performance has improved over the last 2 years significantly. But what we are still lacking is we are still lacking independent participants. And whenever we can add the ability for them, whenever we can leave a leeway for them so that they would not be that scared to participate, we should do that. So my personal opinion is that leeway in CSM should not be changed at all, because it would not improve performance. It would only make CSM worse. And then why should we do that?
Though we were thinking of the idea of having a little bit different threshold model for OXO2 CSM.
That's correct, and this is worth mentioning. So since OXO2 validators are very large, and offline penalties there are, like, even though they are linearly scaled from original or from typical validators, in absolute values they are bigger. And the risk and the bond is lower, as I mentioned. So before the bond was determined by offline penalties plus MEV stealing, in OXO2 CSM, it's mostly offline penalties plus potential slashing. So for OXO2 CSM, we're thinking about improving the strike system and not the performance leeway system, which would mean that right now, if you are below the threshold, it doesn't matter how deep you are below the threshold, like you are either at a 90% efficiency or at 0% efficiency, you will get a single strike. While with the introduction of OXO2 CSM, we would also introduce double strikes, which means that if you will be below like efficiency of 25 or maybe 50%, which would mean that most of the month you've been offline, and for sure you had enough time to either eject your validators using 7002 or to get your problem sorted. In this case, you will get 2 strikes, which would effectively mean that you will be ejected from CSM not after 3 months, but after 2 months, again, of being offline. So it's worth mentioning. So we are improving here, and we believe that it would improve overall performance. But still, to stress out, right now, CSM is a very, very good performant protocol, especially given that it is fully permissionless.
All right. Will, the next one is for you, and then Marin, we're going to come back to you because it looks like Earn is popular. Thanks, God.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. In a Lido ideal world, you can answer this personally because he can't talk on behalf of the DAO, otherwise legal will do unspeakable things to you.
Thanks for letting me know.
How much how much total ETH from all ETH in existence should be staked with Lido in 2027? And what should the distribution of ETH across the different modules? So here, the curator module, CSM, and simple DVT are mentioned, but I would also probably include ST Vaults in there.
I like it. I think like the first thing that I would probably say is right now, like stake concentration on the network and decentralization of stake in general is going in a negative way from my perspective. So the largest centralized exchanges, the largest institutional players are basically using like one custodian, and generally because of the way pricing works, like using that custodian or its partners for staking services, that can be true for across like many different dynamics. Like personally, I'm a big believer in distribution of and decentralization and diversification in a big way. However, I would say that given the trend that we are seeing, I would love to see more stake come to Lido. What the exact number is, I couldn't tell you. I am not personally a believer that Lido should ever control, for example, 80% of stake. I think it's too much. There should be better diversity than that. But I can tell you that the folks that you have sitting up here who have focused over the last 5 years of bringing you a protocol that has over 700 node operators, and that number is only increasing. It's using technologies that are, in many cases, kind of poo-pooed by professional node operators because it hurts their margin, like DVT. That's a major focus, and we've spent massive resources on that. The Lido contributor focus continuously has been around security for stakers and decentralization of the network. And I would really say that more stake going to Lido is better than more stake going to the top 3 entities that are controlling a similar amount, if not more stake than Lido is at this point. So a little bit of a non-answer in some ways. I can personally say from my behalf that I don't think Lido should ever control 80%, but I think from 24% right now, the network would be healthier if Lido had more stake distributed across 700 node operators. In terms of module distribution, I think it's somewhat tricky. And it very much depends on what actually happens within CSM. So I think a very important thing, and it's too complex sometimes for like the dialogue that happens on Twitter, is stake distribution within a module and permissionless staking, right? So if 5 professional node operators that also happen to be in the curated module run the majority of CSM stake, which is not the case today, but some of them are involved there in a big way, why is that better than it going to the curated module where we actually say, actually, you can't run more than this amount of stake, and we want to make sure to some degree through conversation that we have a healthy balance of client diversity and geographic diversity and infrastructure diversity. I really would love to see the community staking and permissionless modules increase, driven by an increase in home stakers on the network. And that is really the important part. Increasing permissionless share so that professional node operators have a more efficient way to run validators isn't like really great, and I don't know who that helps other than those node operators to an extent. I think a really cool thing is that within ST Vaults, these actually disincentivize stake concentration based off of the way the reserve ratio system works. And so, not to get too into it, but basically if you attract more stake to your ST Vaults as a node operator, and we're talking pretty large scales, the amount of ST ETH you can mint per like tier of the thresholds decreases. And that's to incentivize institutions to use multiple node operators, to not concentrate in these 4 to 8 large node operators that are taking an ever-growing percent of the network stake.
Got it. Thank you. So no specific numbers you want to throw out there?
I think that like in a perfect world, and if like CSM could easily get to 40% over the next few years, it could potentially even get larger. But I'd love to see what the stake distribution looks like.
Yeah, I think this idea of like the supply constraints around permissionless node operation is a really important one. Like permissionlessness by itself doesn't make decentralization, and a lot of times it actually leads to centralization. And when you're talking about how do you secure the network, having some sort of surety around robustness, decentralization, infrastructure diversity is really important. Even like at a network average right now, we're seeing client diversity starting to suffer a little bit. Like Lighthouse is doing too good of a job. Like big props to Sigma Prime, but there's a lot of things that we can do especially from a curated perspective, to try to motivate and incentivize professionals to do more from a client robustness perspective. And obviously, we're trying to do that with the node operator types. And so I think more of the network should move in this direction and do so in a way that is like transparent. All right, going back to...
Let me piggyback on the
okay.
question. It was a super...
The earn guy coming in, I like
Jesus, like, but your question was terrible. I wouldn't like to answer it, but I'll still comment because I'm very opinionated. So it kind of gave me a flash. Token 2049, we have a party with OKX. OKX founder comes to me, like, only words he spoke to me was, you guys are centralizing Ethereum, and bugs off. Like, it's like, it's unfair because you don't even have a chance to defend, and it's same on crypto Twitter. So, like, is it better that today we have Coinbase, that we have Bitmine, that we have Binance, and even with Lido on 24%, it's getting pretty tight in terms of decentralization. So if we are going to keep Ethereum decentralized, censorship resistant, and an open finance hub of the globe, well, I think Lido should have much more stake because over the years, even though things were disputable, it's shown it builds, like the contributors built, the DAO was always consistent with the voting and the pushes towards decentralization, and every effort was not profit-driven, for one. So it was not run like a business. If it was, we would demolish the whole market, basically. Now we lost like the upwards momentum. And then secondly, and which is more important, it always looked of like the strength and security of Ethereum itself. So I believe even you spoke with you a lot of times on this type of topics, and you said, all right, but if we start growing too much in terms of TVL, we would probably propose some sort of limits, but not because community started shouting about their bags need more TVL to sell tokens, right? But because at some thresholds, it might have an effect if something goes wrong. But with this state of Ethereum, I think Lido needs much more stake.
Yeah, awesome. I wholeheartedly agree, but let's go back to Earn.
That's going to bring stake as well.
Yeah. Okay, so do you plan to add a referral feature to Lido Earn, especially for USD? With that, we would be more incentivized to bring capital to Lido.
Well, definitely yes. It's already implemented. It functions the same way as it does on staking. So you directly inject your address in the contract, and in theory, no one needs to know where the funds came from in this regards, but we can accredit it pipeline.
All right. For Lido Earn, I guess this is related to Lido Earn ETH, mostly you use looping strategies, but liquidations in DeFi happen in minutes often. So when execues might take days, how do you guys mitigate the risk?
Okay, so this is a great question. So this is the reason why you don't have instant withdrawals. Instant withdrawals require you to flash loan out, hurt the principal, whole concept goes down because it creates a bank run environment. So there are kind of limitations. If there are funds in the buffer, you can exit quickly, but in times of distress, that buffer wouldn't be used for withdrawals. It would be used to delever because you can repay your borrows with the actual buffer, which is usually in ETH, can be sometimes in Repstat depending on the market situation and the active positions. But all in all, we don't keep high leverage exposure. If you look the number of loops, it's not even close to what competitors do. So we take blue chip DeFi as safe as it gets approach to this.
All right. I'm out of questions for Earn, so if you have some more, feel free to send them over. Actually, we have a question about Lido Lens. I don't see Eugene in the room anymore. Maybe, Dima, you can answer it. Are you able to share more information about it, like when we might be open sourcing it?
I think we will do it relatively soon. There's actually nothing like rocket science-ish there. So the overall pipeline for AI audit these days is more or less the same. And if you look at Twitter, if you scroll through Twitter, there's a bunch of different skills repos, different descriptions for how AI agent might work. So what we did here is we took the best practices But what we added on top, and what is not available on the market right now, and it cannot be available, I believe, is we added deep Lido context. Because Lido is a massive protocol, we never upgrade the protocol in one run like all of the protocol. Well, we probably did with Lido v2, but back in the day, the protocol was way smaller. So right now, it's always something being upgraded. Like, for example, in the upcoming release, it would be staking router plus one module plus one new module, while vaults, core, and the rest would remain mostly untouched. So what we added there is we added this context so that our agents can also understand what's happening in the other repos. So when the agent looks at a specific code in the specific repo, it also knows what's going on in the other repos, how these components interact, what are the off-chain components that might be in the private repos and might not have like a super detailed description because it's for use of like 5 people in the world, like console demons, for example, that mitigate the deposit front Tron vulnerability. Yeah, and I think we would likely open source it pretty soon. I cannot tell the exact date because from the user interface perspective, it's not that pretty as you can see, but it yields a good result for us. So yeah, I think we would likely give a talk about it in one of the upcoming conferences.
All right, sounds great. I don't see any more new questions, so if you have some, feel free to raise your hand and we can get to them. Otherwise, I want to conclude with one question to each of the panelists here. If there's one thing that you're looking forward to, let's say in the next year and a half, and whether it's like around Ethereum or the Web3 space or Lido specifically, what is it and why? But let's try to keep the answers like tweet length.
Okay.
Eat 10K.
Good luck.
I'm looking forward to have a vacation.
All right, we'll make it happen. Marin?
Eat 10K.
Eat to 10K, okay. In what currency? I mean, Zimbabwe dollars, I think it's already over, but William?
Tier 1 asset manager or DAT staking via vaults.
I think that might happen pretty soon. All right. Sasha
Alpha.
vacation, right? Don't want to revisit that.
No, I would, I mean, on top of my vacation, I'd like also to see how our idea that we're going to bring in the phase number 2 of the curated module release of the direct deposit will play out, and the overall scheme of this self-balanced stake model. Not something that I'm looking for, something I'm curious about. How did it will play out and how the competition, what the competition is going to look like.
Okay, mine is less economical, so ETH at 10K for sure. But what I'm looking forward is a way more close collaboration between core developers and application layer developers. We are moving there. We're not quite there. I hope we will get there relatively soon.
Awesome, thank you. And I see a really good question about lean Ethereum and how it might affect staking. Happy to talk to whoever sent that question after the panel. Also, we have like our chief researcher that's working on this here, so he'd be the best person to answer that. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.